Well, here I am back in my office again, and also I should be working on stuff, but again, here I am making a video just because I just heard something really interesting on NPR. I listen to NPR here. Thank God for the internet. I've been an NPR junkie for a number of years. But the topic of this particular segment was on a high school in LA, I believe, that they interviewed a girl who started what's called a white awareness group at her high school. And most of the students apparently took some class at the high school that was about race and racism, and apparently they wanted a place to continue the discussions that they had had. Now I found it really interesting. I've sort of heard a little bit about these things before, but not too much. But it was interesting to hear the interviews with the people who were participating in the group, just because, well, they said most of the things they talk about are, well, white privilege, and I guess what it means to be white, or even to think about having an ethnicity at all. And I find it really interesting just because of the type of research that I do, which is generally on identity, particularly identity in multicultural societies. And yeah, I've done a lot of reading on the topic and find it interesting even to see how researchers, in the ivory tower tend to treat identity. Specifically, very few people actually bother to study whiteness, or the idea of what it means to be white, or what it means to have, I guess, the dominant ethnicity in any particular country at all. Usually people study the minorities. But anyway, I've gotten a little bit off on a tangent. So this girl was talking, and they talked with a few other people who also, I guess, mentioned what is it like to try and explain to people, particularly people who don't identify as white, what they're doing. And one girl gave the example of telling some Iranian friend of hers that she was attending this group, and she said the first thing she said when he asked, well, what do you talk about? She said, well, we talk about white privilege. She said this look crossed his face, and she's like, oh no, I have to explain, what we're talking about. And then the commentator interrupted, talking about how, for most people, when you talk about a group, I guess I should make it clear, these groups are white student-only groups, or self-identifying as white, I guess, student-only groups. So, yeah, I lost my chain of thought. Crap. Okay, chain of thought back. The idea is, what does it mean for a society like the US, where white only typically conjures up the power dynamics where other groups are not only excluded, but they're oppressed as part of that exclusion. And I guess personally, I'm a believer in, not safe space exactly, but I think that, well, while I don't think that groups are necessarily natural, or any grouping or category that we have is natural or inevitable, I do believe that people categorize other people, and that categorization process does have consequences, and because it has consequences, we all need to talk about it. And furthermore, that maybe those who self-identify as members of particular categories need to talk about what it means to be part of that group. So in some sense, I feel like safe spaces, or spaces where people can talk about that category membership, can be a good thing. and I think it's actually a necessary thing. I can remember the high school that I went to, which was predominantly white. When I was probably a sophomore or junior, someone decided to start a diversity program where they had a bunch of the black students. We got to go to assemblies once a month or something, or small sort of groups, and talk about things. And I can remember the first one that we had was just incredible, because we talked about issues that maybe you talked to with your friend over here or your friend over there, and something really different and interesting happened to be in a space where there were all of us together talking about our various issues. Because not only did we talk about what it means to be black, but we ended up also talking about our own intragroup dynamics, as far as how we defined ourselves and what does it mean to define ourselves the way that we define ourselves, not just, oh, look at us, everybody hates us, blah, blah, blah. So, and I guess I'm thinking back to, like I said, research that I've read about things like aversive racism, and common in-group identity model, and the most recent one that I read, or journal article that I read that really caught my attention, was about respect and what it means to be a member of a subgroup underneath the common identity of American. And some of their measures or way they operationalize certain things is but they found some interesting, well, to me they're interesting findings. When you basically there were people who identified as African American, people who identified as Latino American, and people who identified as white. Now what's really interesting is that in terms of respect, people that felt that their subgroup, Latinos and African Americans who felt like their subgroup had a measure of respect underneath the common identity of American, actually had many more positive feelings about America in general, which, it's kind of obvious. But people who identified more strongly with their white people who identified more strongly with their subgroup actually didn't have positive feelings, or it didn't correlate with positive feelings about the category American. Now, when I'm looking at that, and I probably have to have the actual notes that I took in front of me to be clear, but to my mind, my interpretation of that is that because American is sort of paired with white in their minds, so because of being the dominant group, which maybe that makes sense in a certain situation, I guess. Oh, getting lost in theory in my mind. Well, never mind what I was trying to say. I'll just blabber on. But the basic point of the research that I've looked at, it seems like people who were in subgroups that identify strongly with that subgroup, if it's not white, their feelings toward America are tied to how they feel America thinks about their subgroup. Whereas for white people, it's not. It's, in some senses, I think it's I can be an individual, and there's no tension between Americanness and whiteness. That's because of, to me, not having to think about having an ethnicity, whereas if you are some brown person, Latino, African American, Asian American, whatever, I guess person of color is the term, your ethnicity can be chronically salient, which means that you're always thinking about it, or it's always maybe maybe if it's not at the forefront of your mind, it's kind of like simmering there in the back, and not necessarily because of you, but because of awareness that people look at you and judge you as that. But anyway, so the whole point of this is, for anyone who is watching this, I'm just wondering, what do you think about safe spaces or X-only spaces?